The Newsday continues here on One News Now Business. I'm Diego Castro. Here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate fronts. The Bureau of Internal Revenue is confident of meeting its 1.1 trillion peso collection target during the tax season this year. According to the BIR, there are only 4% of the 4.65 million taxpayers in the country who have yet to file their income tax returns before the 5 p.m. deadline today, April 17. The BIR has pegged the 2.6 trillion peso revenue target this year, higher than last year's 2.3 trillion pesos. 1.1 trillion pesos of this year's target is sought to be generated from the collections until the April 17 deadline. The Bureau also says there have been short lines at the BIR regional offices, despite today being the last day of filing. The BIR says this is thanks to the availability of the option to file tax returns online.
Sa nakikita natin ngayon, mukhang kakaunti ang mga nandito ngayon. Kaya magandang senyales po yan dahil ibig sabihin yan, mukhang gumana naman po at marami yung ating tax campaign dahil ang deadline naman natin ay on or before April 17. So hindi kinakailangan hintayin ang araw na to. So hopefully lahat naman sila nakapag-file at nakapagbayad na bago ngayong Lunes, at saka isa pang indikasyon na maganda yan ay dahil up and running naman ang ating online system, kaya po kaya nilang magawa ito through online.
Approved investments soared 155% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2023. Data from the Board of Investment showed that approved investments reached over 463 billion pesos in the first 3 months of the year, much higher compared to the 181 billion pesos from the same period of 2022. Local investment approvals showed an increase of 68%, while foreign investment approvals saw a surge of 3,722%. The BOI said the renewable energy sector had the highest investment approvals during the first quarter of 2023, followed by manufacturing. Trade Secretary Alfredo Pascual said the recent figures on investment approvals reflected a stronger investor interest in the Philippines. The International Monetary Fund sees the Philippines to likely sustain its growth momentum this year. That's according to a report by Business World. The multilateral lender says the country stands to benefit from China's reopening, which should lead to higher net exports and more tourism activities. In its latest report, the IMF raised the 2023 GDP growth forecast for the Philippines to 6%. That's higher than the 5% forecast given in January. The IMF says it's upgraded its projection due to better than expected fourth quarter performance last year. On to some global updates. The upper house of the Swiss parliament agreed to a more strict stance on banks to push through government guarantees for UBS's takeover of Credit Suisse. Here's how the country broke a golden rule of capital.
$17.3 billion of Credit Suisse bank bonds went instantly worthless as it was absorbed by UBS. Now investors are angry, and authorities across the world are side-eyeing Switzerland, all of which is putting at risk a crucial way that banks raise money. The bonds that got wiped out were AT1 notes, considered a risky form of debt that comes with a high yield. Julia, can you tell us what happened in the case of Credit Suisse?
Yeah, of course. So let's assume these are the senior bank bonds, these are the AT1s, and this is the equity. Now, regularly, in a banking crisis, the equity would have to be fully wiped out before AT1 holders were to take any losses. But this is not what happened in the case of Credit Suisse. Here, we had the equity holders, although they lost most of their investment, still got some of their money back, whilst the AT1 bonds were fully wiped out.
Okay, I see. So then, why is everyone throwing shade at Switzerland?
In the case of Credit Suisse, the Swiss regulator said it relied on the bond documents and on newly passed laws to push through this type of deal. But this is different to how things would have been done elsewhere. Authorities in the European Union, in Singapore, in the UK have come out and said, for us, the equity would have to be fully wiped out before we touch the AT1 bonds. So that sounded like a stark contrast to what the Swiss regulator chose to do.
So then, why are investors so worried?
So the market for these AT1 bonds, which is worth 255 billion globally, is really facing a confidence test. Because of this move by the Swiss authorities, investors are wondering, well, how will they handle the next banking crisis? Who will carry the burden of the losses? And will authorities be able to change the law at the last minute to save a bank if that bank is big enough that its collapse would cause systemic risks? Moreover, investors think that regulators, who have had a lot of power since the global financial crisis, have bent the rules in the pursuit of financial stability, and that's undermining confidence in Switzerland. As a consequence, the AT1 bondholders are now gearing up for litigation against the Swiss authorities.
We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. The national government's gross borrowing jumped to over 375 billion pesos in February. Data from the Bureau of Treasury showed that the figure is 606% higher from that of the same month a year ago. Month-on-month, gross borrowings inched up by 2.3% from over 366 billion pesos recorded in January. 95% of the total gross borrowings in February were domestic debt, which increased by 698% year-on-year. External borrowings almost doubled to nearly 16 billion pesos in February, from 8 billion in the same month last year. Light Rail Manila Corporation expects new train sets for the LRT Line 1 to arrive within the year. Business World reports that LRMC is waiting for 10 sets Generation 4 light rail vehicles. The LRMC says that 20 of the 30 Gen 4 train sets manufactured in Spain and Mexico have already arrived in Manila. LRMC also says that the train sets on hand are simply undergoing tests and trial runs to complete the necessary kilometer run before commercial operations. Plans to raise the retirement have faced strong backlash as the ability to fund retirement benefits has governments around the world concerned. Retirement is also at risk of becoming a privilege for the rich. Bloomberg takes a look at what's at stake.
Most of us dream of a long and healthy retirement, but for some people, those dreams are fast becoming a fantasy.
Tengo hijos y estoy muy preocupado por el futuro de ellos. Ya no vamos a tener salud, ya no vamos a tener pensión.
Και τα ζητήματα που έχουν να κάνουν με τη σύνταξη αλλά και την υγεία και την πρόνοια, για μας αυτό είναι αιτία πολέμου.
Je vais travailler longtemps et profiter de mes enfants, mes petits-enfants.
With an aging population and birth rates declining, the ability to fund retirement has governments around the world concerned. Bloomberg News reporter Amy Bainbridge found in a months-long look at the issue that this could be the slowest moving financial crisis of our time.
The percentage of GDP spent on retirement systems around the world is in the double digits, and that is simply going to rise. So the problem facing governments around the world is just how expensive it is to look after older generations.
This chart shows the age dependency ratio across OECD member countries. This is simply the number of individuals aged 65 and over per 100 people of working age. And in the next 50 years, the ratio is expected to soar to almost 60%, up from 20% in the 1990s. Among economists, there's a near universal agreement that we'll all need to work for longer, save more, or receive less when we retire. But plans to increase the retirement age are facing strong backlash.
Perhaps the biggest flashpoint at the moment is in France, where Emmanuel Macron wants to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, and that's caused huge protests. People are extremely unhappy about being told that they have to work longer.
Much of the resistance to raising the retirement age is rooted in the fact that making people wait longer to claim their pensions falls most heavily on those who can least afford it. Precarious working conditions, family caregiving responsibilities, poor health, and age discrimination make it difficult or impossible for many to work into their late 60s and beyond. All these factors are tightly linked to class and race. In Australia, 70% of Indigenous men live long enough to access the government pension, compared with 86% of the general population. In the UK, professional workers live 5.5 years longer than manual workers. And in the US, white men live 7.6 years longer than black men. So what can governments do to ease the financial pressure of rising pension costs?
One option, of course, is increasing taxes to pay for retirement, but that's not popular either. Some of the other ideas look at time you spend in a profession and getting a commensurate pension when you have completed a set number of years in the workforce.
There's clearly no easy solution, but experts warn that governments should face up to the issue sooner rather than later.
And those are the top business stories of the hour. I'm Diego Castro. Join us again at 2 p.m. We are One News. All sides, all the time.